welcome to my studio. It's Valentine's Day and I thought it would be fun to paint something red. And red is a tricky color because sometimes it just looks washed out unless you have the right red pastel. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and I want to go ahead and do a demonstration of some poppies because that's a perfect subject for painting with red, and it really will allow me to illustrate how we can get those reds to really pop, to really come alive. So if you want to have your reds come alive, then stick with me, watch until the end, and you'll get to see the final result. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and like and subscribe and all that good stuff, because you never know when I'm going to put out a new one. I try to do one a week. So let's get started with today's demonstration. Today I'm going to be working on a piece of Pastelmat sanded paper. And Pastelmat is an interesting surface in that it feels very, very smooth, yet it actually takes quite a few layers of pastel. But you have to really get a few layers down before the pastel starts to move around. So it's a kind of different to work with if you're used to other sanded papers. I'm working with my pastel set, which these are Terry Ludwig pastels. This is the floral landscape set. This is a set that I curated last year, and it's good not just for flowers but for really anything. I use it for just about anything I want to paint. So I'm going to dive right into the demo today, and I'm looking at a reference photo, but I'm going to take liberties with it. I'm not going to copy it exactly as it is. It just kind of gives me an idea of some poppy shapes, but there's really too much information. There's a fence post back there, there's some other things sticking up in the background. It's too much clutter, and I like to edit the clutter. And what I thought I would do, just to keep things simple today, is to eliminate a lot of this stuff in the background and just make it a nice happy blue sky, because I want my flowers to appear sunlit, and if it's going to be sunlit, then of course I have to have a blue sky so that the sun can be out there and shining. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a Nupastels. This is a hard pastel, and I'm going to draw in my basic shapes. And first thing I'll do is I'll set the horizon. Now remember, I just said I want to have a lot of sky showing, so I think I'm going to just kind of lightly indicate a horizon right about here so I can have a lot of sky filter in through the poppies. Now I have to arrange some poppy shapes, and basically what I'm going to do is just very lightly draw the overall shape that I want. Now, I'm not going to draw and color in. When I paint flowers such as poppies, I like to use the side of my pastel and block in the shapes rather than draw lines and color it in. So I just need the shapes to tell me where they're going to be located. So I want a nice arrangement that kind of leads your eye around the painting. So I don't want them all over, but then they have to be in an arrangement. So what if we were to do like a gentle S curve, and we can put a little poppy on the points of the arrangement. Now one thing that I want to remind myself is I don't want all the poppies to be the exact same size, because look what I've done. I've pretty much drawn them the same size, and that will be boring. So I'm going to have to change that up as the painting progresses. Alright, so once I have that in place, oh, and I should say, they very well may change position as the painting progresses. So it's not really written in stone. It's just to get me started. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to keep working with this Nupastel. It's a spruce blue. It's number 305, and I like it because it's a nice rich dark. And what I'm doing right now is I'm putting in what I like to call the dirt, and I'm kind of creating dirt behind the flowers so that when I put all of the green leaves and stems and flowers, that they have something to hold them in place. Otherwise they might look like they're floating in the grass. So I'm going to just use the blue to do that. The next thing I'm going to do is actually I'm going to pull out this. These are just an odd assortment of hard pastels. I happen to be using Nupastels. But I want to use some hard pastels for the first layer so that I can get some pastel down and then start to respond to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an orange, just kind of a dull orange, and I'm going to put it down in the areas that I don't have that dark. This is going to be orange that's going to be underneath all of the green, because I know I'm going to have a lot of green coming up on top of these layers, and I really want it to be a little bit more interesting, and I know that orange or red underneath the green makes for a much more interesting color scheme than if I just use green. And I'm going over with a darker version of kind of a reddish pink over that dark area, that dirt area that I already put in. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I want to block in the sky. So let's block in the sky, and I'm going to just keep going with this pink reddish theme, and I'm going to block in the sky with a pale pink. Now this doesn't mean that I'm going to keep the sky pink, oops, although I could, but if I choose to make a blue sky, which is what my intention was, I could put the blue on top of the pink, and it again will be more interesting. One of the beautiful things about pastel is the ability that we have to layer, and the more I'm stumbling over my words, the more complex our layers, the more interesting the painting is going to be. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to block in parts of the flower. Now these are going to be red, so I'm going to start with the darkest, dullest red that I have. And I just threw another guy in there. And when I start painting these flowers, when I move to my soft pastels next, I'm going to start dark and go more intense and warmer. And I'll get to that in just a minute, so that'll make sense if you stick with me. I'll explain what I mean by that. Alright, now I have a complete layer. Now a lot of times what I do on this first layer is I'll rub it in somehow. But as you can see, Pastelmat grabs the pastel so well that you really can't push it around until you have more layers. So I'm not going to blend in this first layer, and there's really no need to, because of the nice gray tone of the paper really unifies and pulls all the colors together anyway. So it's fine the way it is. Let's jump into the soft pastel, which are the Terry Ludwigs. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by reinforcing the dark areas. So remember where the dark areas were? It was the dirt, this kind of suggested pathway of dirt leading through my little slice of meadow. That's a dark blue, so I really reinforced the dark blue that I had in the first layer. Let's add a dark burgundy. And let's then jump to the local color, which is green. This is a green meadow filled with flowers, poppies, so we need to have the green, but I didn't go right with the green. I built up to the green. And what I want you to notice, if you can see, that you can still notice the layers of color underneath. So I see the underpainting color, I see some purple, you know, that burgundy, I see the green, I see the blue. I'm not covering everything up. Alright, now let's keep going with that same idea. Now let's reinforce this peachy color that I had. And this is just with the softer pastel. So it goes on a lot, especially on this Pastelmat. It goes on so nicely. I really love the way it grabs the pastel. I'm going to add some of the darker salmon color in over my dark. I just covered up the green. You're probably saying, wait a minute, you just covered up the green. Yeah, you're right, I did cover up the green. But I'll be able to reintroduce the green. That's not really going to be an issue. Alright, so now where am I? I have reinforced the darks, reinforced the dirt colors. What I'm going to do now is start to add the green. And you might be thinking, well, shouldn't you probably start by painting the flowers? Because isn't this painting supposed to be about these flowers? And that would be a good question. But I'm going to answer no, because the flowers come last for me, because they are the decorations, and I have to build or lay the foundation before I can put in the decorations. So I know where they are going to go. I still have them blocked off, but I'm going to put in the green and then I'll come back for the flowers. So what I'm doing with the greens is I'm starting in the distance by putting in some lighter, cooler, duller, more neutral greens. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to start to establish a feeling of depth or aerial perspective. And I know that I'm up close to these flowers, but there are some green grasses beyond what I'm looking at that's right in front of me. So I want to represent them, but they have to be lighter and duller and cooler. So think about those rules of aerial perspective that you have learned, or you may have learned about, and that's what I'm doing right here. I just put the dark green back in. That was a dark warm green, and now I'm putting in a dark cooler green just in these little shadowed areas, just for a little variety. I'm going to have a little bit of both. Okay, now I'm going to I've got it lighter and duller. Now I'm going to kind of increase the intensity of my green, and I'm going to put in what I consider the regular grass green, crayon box green. I have a couple of those in my set, so the brighter greens. I'm going to put those in right now. And I know that it probably is going to get a little bit warmer in the foreground, so I'm going to put in a warmer green, and that is a green with a little more yellow in it. And I have a couple of those in my set. Look at the difference here. You see that yellowy green, and how by using it in this foreground area, it really pushes those lighter greens into the distance, and I have a much stronger feeling of depth. All right, so now I've got enough green, and notice I haven't done any single blades of grass or leaves or seed pods or any of that yet. Those are the decorations. I want to work on the sky just a little bit because it's really going to set the mood, and I kind of like the color harmony of the pink sky, but I really need it to be a blue sky so that I can show you how to get those poppies to really pop. So I'm going to go ahead and work a little bit on the blue sky. I'm going to start with a darker, cooler blue up at the top of the sky, and then as it goes a little bit lower or down towards the horizon, it's going to get a little bit lighter, and it's going to get a little bit warmer. So I'm going to introduce a warmer blue-green, turquoise, pale turquoise. And what I'm going to do is start to pull this lighter color down into the grassy areas. And this is really known as negative painting. I'm going to make grass appear by painting the sky into those grassy areas. One thing I want to be sure is that I have a smooth transition of color from the darker to the lighter to the warmer. So I had a little bit of a line right there, so I had to cover that up. Now I'm going to come back and work on this a little bit more, but I really like how the pink of that underpainting is peeking through, and that pink is relating to the pinks that are in the ground. So the underpainting can really help pull your painting together. So let's work on the poppies. We're getting to that point now, and remember what I said a few minutes ago is I'm going to start with the darkest red that I have in my set, and I'm going to gradually change it and make it brighter and more intense. Looking at the poppies in my reference photo for an idea, and I like the way this guy, the shapes, but I'm using the side of the pastel stick to make the petal shapes. So I'm not drawing and coloring in. I'm basically just using the side to make some poppy shapes. Now, one thing that's going to happen, and I'm going to be adjusting it as I progress with the painting, is you're going to notice that all of the poppies now look like they are on top, like basically kind of glued on top of the green. And that isn't going to be a good thing, and it took me a while to realize that you can't really do it that, otherwise it doesn't look natural. So I'm going to have to pull some of the green on top of these flowers as the painting progresses. Now I'm going to do one thing before I move on, is I would like to have an illusion of some other poppies, smaller ones, in the distance. I see that in my reference photo and I like that. So I'm using a dull red, kind of a dark salmony color, and I'm just making some smaller marks. And these smaller marks hopefully will look like they're further back, because these flowers that are in front are actually larger, and they're that'll show that they're more in the front. Alright, so now we're going to work on getting these poppies to come alive. So there's the darkest. I'm going to step it up with a red that is still a nice dark rich red, but it's not as dark as the red violet that was that I first put down. Again, I'm using the side of my pastel to paint petal shapes. You can look at your reference photo, you know, if you're painting from a photo or if you're painting from life, just to give you an idea of how they go. Alright, now, here comes the fun part. Now, before I learned this idea of getting something to look like it's lit by the sun or sunlit, I would think, well, I need to add light to this to these flowers. So what should I do? Maybe I need to add a lighter version of red. And I'm going to just show you over here on the side. So if I was to put a lighter version of red on top, it would be like this, pale salmon. And that would be the sunlight. But I realized that that doesn't really look very warm. It doesn't really look like very sunny. So what I realized is I don't really need to go warmer, or I don't need to go paler or lighter. I need to go warmer or brighter. So I'm going to go in with a red orange, which is a warmer version of the red. And let's just say the sunlight is coming, say, from over here. So then the tops and the right side of the petals are going to be getting the most light. And you can see that by using a warmer, more intense red, I have a flower that looks more sunlit or illuminated by the sun, rather than washed out and pale. So don't go lighter, go warmer and more intense. And in fact, I can go even warmer by putting in an orange. If I really want it to be sunny, go ahead with an orange, and you can really pump up the light in those flowers. Much more sunlit than this guy here, where I just used a pink, pale pink. And if you want more information on this, I do lessons on Patreon, and I have done a complete lesson on this whole idea of painting light and shadow, and that might be something if you want to delve into that a little bit more. Now what I've done is, and there'll be a link to that on the description to the Patreon page, I've taken a dark purple, very dark purple, almost looks black, and I've put in those wonderful poppy centers. And I don't want them on every single one of them, otherwise they're all going to look the same. So I just put a little peak of them in some areas. And when I look at in my little photo, I see that in those centers there's also kind of a kind of a peachy area right in there, and there's some little filaments, you know, and I'll come and put those in at the end with the harder pastels. So let's see where we're at now. We've got the flowers, but one thing that I noticed is we've kind of lost the green, and the second thing I noticed is they all look like they're pasted on top. We want to get rid of that feeling of stuck on top of foliage. We need to introduce or reintroduce some more of the foliage. Actually, before we do that, I think we need to give them some stems. And the problem with stems a lot of times, let me see if I should go a little bit darker, is if we're not careful, we have stems that look like balloon sticks. So you don't want to do a hard straight line. You really want to look at the in my reference photo, they are really got interesting they're kind of dancing on their stems, you know, they're not perfectly straight. So I want to just put in a few of those lyrical lines, kind of dancing lines. And that's the darker pastel. Let's get one a little bit lighter to give it a little bit of sunlight on the right side. So I'm going to go in. And the trick to making your stems look more natural is to use broken lines. So in other words, don't do this. That looks not as natural as if you just kind of press and release, so you get a nice broken line. Broken lines are going to look more natural than if you just draw straight lines and don't release your pastel. Alright, so now that they have stems, we can go back and add some more of the green stuff. One thing that I notice and I really love about poppies is those wonderful seed pods. And they are typically a little bit lighter in color, so I'll just go in with a paler green and just make some marks. Again, I am not one to paint with a lot of detail. I rather suggest detail, so if I can make a mark and have it look like something, that to me is more my goal than having it exactly like the photograph. So now I've got some of those wonderful seed pod guys in there. Now we want to have a little bit of a variety of foliage, so I'm going to start to change the way I make my marks. And I'm going to put some fat marks in, mixed in with those thin lines, and I'm going to start to pull. This needs to be a little bit brighter. I'm going to start to pull some of the foliage and things over some of the flowers. So here I just pulled a little leaf over that guy. Let's pull some up into the sky. Let's change the color green because I have so many different ones, so we can have a variety. Pull some more up, maybe over here. So if I don't want to cover them all up, but you can see I can start, if I start to bury them just a little bit, then it feels a little bit more natural. One thing that I'm not liking about this stem is it's just a weird, I don't know, it's weird. So if there's something that you don't like, you don't have to keep it. Pastel is so forgiving, and we can go ahead and we can make changes, and if you're not sure you like something, brush it out or paint over it, and don't be afraid to make changes. There, I like that one much better. That's what I love about pastel. It is so forgiving, but a lot of times we treat our paintings as if they were too precious. We're afraid to make it worse, and so we don't try to make things better. So never be afraid. Now I'm putting in some of that really nice yellowy green just to brighten things up, because remember, it's supposed to be sunny, so we're going to have, the green is also going to have some warmer tones. Not just, we don't want to just make pale grasses, we want warmer grasses. The last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take out my hard pastels again, and I'm going to use some of the hard pastels to go in and create some thinner lines. So I like to have I like my meadows or my flowers to look like they have a lot of interesting things. Alright, I'm working on doing the finishing touches with creating this interesting texture, and trying to explain what I mean. And what I want to do is create depth in this grassy area. So I looked at it and I realized it's not, I lost the darks along the way. So I'm going to use a little bit of Blair Workable Fixative. And what it's going to do is it will darken the painting. Now, you wouldn't want this to happen if you were just finished a painting and you loved it, and all of a sudden you spray it thinking you're doing a good thing, and you get a dark. But in this case, it's something that we really want, because I wanted to restore some of that rich dark that I think I was losing somewhat. So as this dries, and it only usually takes a couple of minutes, I can then go back and it's not quite dry, so you can't rush things, but when I go back over it, it'll hopefully maintain some of the darks, and then that way I can have a little bit more depth within my greens. So let's try it. There we go. It's really cool how you get this effect of a little bit of an illusion of texture. I'm not going to go too crazy with it. I just really wanted to restore the darks. And then I'm going to come in back with these hard pastels and then come and create a more variety with my linear marks. And I have this one grass guy up here and he kind of looks lonely. So let's put another one. We'll have to get a little bit darker. Let's do another one right in here, because remember I wanted that feeling of looking up into the sky with these grasses. Like, in other words, we are down below looking up. That's the illusion that I'm trying to capture. Alright, so I'm just going to create some kind of loose painterly lines with a variety of the greens that I have. Sometimes I call this the grass fox, because it's just a lot of different colors that I can use to paint grass. Now, the next thing that I want to do, and I'm almost finished with the painting, is I wanted some of the sky to be peeking through, and right now it looks a little bit solid. We need to have a little more air. So I'm going to take, I could use the soft pastel, but I'm going to just take a pale blue Nupastel and just kind of work it down in between some of the grasses so that I can get that feeling of the sky or air peeking through. Kind of like when you paint trees and do sky holes. I'm doing grass, I guess you could call them grass holes. Oh, that's not very nice. That's so silly. Oh my goodness. So I love doing these negative paint, and you can really get carried away with it, because I've already established the positive shapes of the grass. Now I'm coming back with the sky and pulling out some of those grasses. So it's a lot of fun to go back and forth. So you put in some sky and then come back with some of the green, and then you can get a really nice feeling of interest in your grassy areas. Alright, now, just to finish it off, I want to go ahead and really emphasize some areas on the flowers, because right now everything is kind of soft and out of focus, and I really want to come in and add a few harder edges on some of these flowers. So I'm going back in with the harder pastel with the orange, and I'm just putting in some harder edges in some areas of the flower. I don't want to put it in everywhere, because then it's not really going to stand out. Let's go ahead with this softer pastel. It's a little bit more vibrant. Here we go. And just kind of reinforce some of those petals. Harder bits on some of the petals, and then let some of them be a little bit soft and out of focus. Then the last thing I'm going to do is, remember I said that I noticed there's some really interesting little, I guess they're like little filaments in the flowers in the middle. So I'm using that blue Nupastel that I started with and just making a few of those little marks in there, just to kind of get that feeling of those little kind of filament things that you've got. I don't know the technical term for those. Alright, so I think that I've done enough on this one. You certainly got the idea. The really main thing on this demo is how to get your reds to come alive. And just to reinforce, don't go lighter, go warmer and more intense, and you'll really get them to pop. So I hope you have enjoyed this demo and have fun painting red this weekend.